I'm so excited for this event. It's going to be amazing. We got all three heavy hitters here. We got Terry Schuyler from Ridgway. We got Luke Cartin from Park City. And we got David Roberts from the Volts podcast. Give it up big, everybody. First try. First try.
You got it, Tom.
We'll get him.
Tom, huh?
Hello, everybody. Is this thing on? Is this working? Wow, we really cleared them out. Grid talk. Everybody loves grid talk. So today we are talking about electricity, my favorite thing in the world, and how it overlaps with small mountain towns and how small mountain towns can leverage changes in electricity, which I think is interesting for, among other reasons, because a lot of the things that get discussed here, like waste or buildings, there are things that towns have direct control over, more or less. I'm sure some town officials are laughing at that. Semi-direct control over their own waste and water, buildings, things like that. But when it comes to electricity, small towns tend to be single nodes on larger grids that are overseen by utilities that have lots of towns in their service areas. So the question is, how can small towns leverage change on these big grids? Like, what kind of things can they do to change their electricity situation? Because as you know, if you listen to Volts, electricity is the heart of sustainability, the heart of decarbonization from which all else flows. So I want to, both these guys are in small towns and have successfully leveraged such changes in their towns. So we're going to hear stories about how that works. Maybe let's start with you, Luke. So, because among other things, there are different kinds of utilities, as you know, and we have an interesting contrast here in that Terry is part of a co-op, which is like a small member-owned utility, whereas poor Luke is stranded in the territory of a large investor-owned Berkshire Hathaway mega utility. So let's start with you, Luke. You're a small town in a big in a big utility area. How did you bring other towns together to find some leverage, and what came of it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a country song that's called "If You're Going to Be Dumb, You Got to Be Tough." That's kind of the motto we're leaning on. So, Park City, Utah, 8,500 year-round residents. We have 2 ski resorts, home of Sundance Film Fest. But it's when you look at the electricity side of it, folks are like, why does a small little community, really care about jumping into the world of electricity? When you look at the electricity sales, it's $26 million that leaves our community going to an investor-owned utility. We are in the liberal bastion of Utah. Our official state rock is coal. Everyone laughs about it. It is true. It actually is our official state rock.
Not a joke.
No, it's people are like, and people always look at you like, you do sustainability in Utah. Are you just, what's wrong with you? But the interesting thing is the way we went down this pathway was when you look at the basic core services of utility, pole, wires, billing, and stuff like that, the utility does a great job. We just strongly disagree with the generation mix. And you have the climate issue, the climate impacts, which are massive, but you also look at the economic impacts as well. So being in Utah, we had to form a coalition of groups. So we actually started out with ourselves, Summit County, which is our unincorporated side of it, again, very rural, a lot of ranching, and also Salt Lake City. And we approached the utility and said, hey, again, love what you do on the billing and all these other things. We just want to have a discussion around generation. And instead of getting into a legal standoff right out the bat of we're going to municipalize, we're going to rip this away from you, we said, is there a way to create a concept of kind of you have your general rate service, right? 60% coal, very traditional on that side of it. But could we crack open the door for renewable rate service as well, a net 100, right? So you look at what your electricity is over a year and make sure that there's an equivalent amount of renewables. And I know that's imperfect, but we don't have the 8760 model. I don't have the hourly access of what that looks like. So it's like, can we start there and then continue to refine it and create kind of a bucket of costs and benefits of both sides and balance it out, right? Let's do this in a true fashion. So we started the utility conversation in earnest around 2017. And also at that time, our 3 communities funded a joint study of saying, hey, what possibilities out there exist? Is there anyone we can follow? Because sometimes the best thing you can do is just rip off someone else's great ideas. And there wasn't.
What about, can I just insert here, like what you ended up doing is reminiscent of what's happening in California with what's called community choice aggregation, which is the same sort of thing, like a town opts out of the utilities generation mix and procures its own clean generation while still being part of the utility. Is that, how is it different than what California is trying?
That's a great question. So there was actually some CCA-style legislation that tried and failed in the Utah legislature. Now, to take a quick step back, again, we have to deal with the legislature, right? Utah's a non-home rule state. I can't touch energy code. I can't do all those things. But we had to get the utility to the table, first of all, saying, hey, we want to keep you whole. You, again, can be a utility. We just want you to actually bring on generation that we can credit to these. So working with the utility back in 2019, we actually went to the Utah legislature with a joint bill called House Bill 411, the Community Renewable Energy Act. Again, Utah, 88% Republican. Democrats are like almost token to the level of influence they have there. But the interesting thing is people said, you went to the Utah legislature with, we have coal mines, we have coal generation in our states, with a renewable bill, and I mean the Cliff Notes version, we passed it with 2/3 majority in both the House and Senate.
And can I ask, I would assume that the reason you get majority support in a Republican legislature for something like this is not climate change, it's not climate action. I'm guessing it has to do with, I'm guessing the pitch was something like, big, inefficient government monopoly has you trapped. We want to be independent and forge our own way, that sort of like that line.
Yeah, exactly. So you see the state of Utah right now hates the federal government. Federal overreach is the worst thing ever. And then we say, well, state overreach is the second worst thing ever. So what we're trying to do is literally like, let's stay like this. Let's make it competitive. Like I'm firmly believing in standing behind the concept of let's kind of open the doors up a little bit and look at, again, this grid management side of can we bring on more generation of renewables? It is an economic driver for the state of Utah. And when we went through with HB 411, the cool thing is because I wanted to get to the coalition, because that's the core part of what's going to make us successful, is we open the door for communities to opt in, to join an opt-out program. Again, the messaging is wildly confusing. But what we wanted to say is, hey, if you want to join this coalition, pass some resolutions and join into it's called the Utah Renewable Communities. We have a website. It is 19 municipalities. We thought there was going to be 5 of us. Mm-hmm. With 19, now it's representative of between 25 and 30% of Rocky Mountain Power's total Utah sales. So if you think of RMP sells about $2.5 billion worth of electricity to Utah, we're right now trying to steer about 800 million of that. So again, this isn't like, hey, that's a cute thing, let the hippies from Park City go smoke their weed and build a couple solar panels. This is now all of a sudden.
There's anything wrong with that?
No, I don't judge. Yeah, it's fair market, but the government regulation. But no, the goal behind it again is saying, all right, now all of a sudden we've pooled and we've got very critical mass. So right now we are actually working on a joint utility filing and also an RFP. Because we're ready to rip on this thing. And again,
so the idea is you get all all the people, all the towns together, and then you have substantial size, and then you can start procuring meaningful amounts of clean energy.
Correct. So now every resident, every commercial business, every street light, and every industrial partner within these communities will have the option, at least, of saying, instead of just here's your electricity mix, deal with it. It's, hey, now here's a renewable energy mix that we're counting on you to do, and you can opt out. You can say, I don't want a part of that. I just like the traditional, in my mind, not economically well-managed side of it. And again, to prove this out, the city, Park City, we also worked in this coalition piece, and we said, hey, let's live and breathe by this, so let's tie our electricity load to it too. So we went out and we worked with Summit County government, Salt Lake City government, again, the typical players, to look at our government operations. But we also brought in our 2 ski resort partners, which is a big deal because they're the behemoths that compete against each other in every way possible, to include them in a utility buy as well, and also a university. And we went out and procured an 80 megawatt solar farm. This is on a Superfund site. It is in rural Utah, and we said, we're gonna put our money where the mouth is and prove this out. And again,
was that the first big purchase that the coalition made, or was
yeah,
it
so
smaller
it's adjacent, it's coalition adjacent. So the interesting thing is we said, hey, we can get this procurement rolling for our own government operations while we work on this community-wide resource. Again, proof of concept in that side of it. The cool thing, again, people said the 80 megawatt solar farm, it's going to be a premium. The interesting thing is where the carbon-based fuels are. If you're a Utah RMP customer, you have something called the EBA, Energy Balancing Account. It says, hey, we got some of this worked into base rates, but we got to balance it out depending on what happens to natural gas and coal. That is up. That is up a lot. And our premium solar plant is actually now creating a credit in all of our bills. So we've actually, again, proved this out. So again, it is a very complex issue, but we brought together an original community of 3. Now we're 19. And the cool thing is the net 100 by 2030 goal is based off of our city's goal of 8,500 folks. Now all of a sudden we have 30% of potentially of Rocky Mountain Power sales now going that pathway as well.
And so the punchline here is, I'm guessing the Republicans in the legislature thought, if you all want to opt out and go buy more expensive power so that you can call yourself green, knock yourself out, but now your power is cheaper than the utility power. And so I want to know, like, do you think that's going to snowball? You think more people are going to come in and try to grab this cheaper power? What do you think the utility, I bet the utility also thought, go get your more expensive power, have fun. But now if you start getting renewables and are paying less than the people on the utility plan, is the utility gonna, there's 2 ways it could go. It could say, oh, it looks like renewables are cheap. Perhaps we'll become enlightened and buy more renewables. Or they could panic and say, screw this opt-out thing, we're gonna start fighting this and try to get these people back in. Like, how are they reacting to?
Yeah, I mean, it's complex and frustrating at points, but again, RMP, I will give them credit. People will vilify them for being a major utility. They operate 24 coal units, but the interesting thing is at least they came to the table, right? At least we're still holding them there. And again, we have frustrating conversations, we have great conversations, but when you look at it from the state perspective we have very, very rural parts of our state. There's a county called Beaver County, and there's a guy named Mark Whitney who came and testified on behalf of the bill of saying, hey, we have a rural lifestyle, we want to keep this rural lifestyle. We'll take as much solar as you can give us, because compare and contrast that to like an Amazon shipping center where you have trucks and bodies and all this other stuff. Now we're bringing a $100 million project that can now pave the roads and stuff like that, and you can still graze sheep underneath it. So, but getting back to the state legislature, again, it's just like the key concept we're going off of is let's just tie costs and benefits to them and let them compete. And again, people, it's kind of a who will blink first piece. and the great thing is, again, our response is we'll pay for all of our costs, but we also want to reap all of our benefits of what we brought online. And let's do that. And again, let's true it up. Let's have this open and honest conversation, because again, the utility is great about being a utility of keeping the lights on, keeping the poles and wires up in the billing side. So we said, we're going to partner with it. So that's where we are slightly different from a CCA. It's more technical on that. But the other great thing with the utility is they're saying, go build those renewables, right? Now you have a zero fuel cost thing. You've got a guaranteed PPA for 25, 30 years that you can also reap the benefits of. And again, my response is, it is the win-win of both climate and economics of saying, let's put our money where the mouth is and let's rip this on a major part of the grid. This isn't a 2 megawatt solar piece. This is hundreds of megawatts of potential new renewables coming online. And we're saying, let's air the dirty laundry and see where these things shake out.
Interesting, interesting. And so, Terry, you're in a totally different world. For one thing, Ridgway, it's Ridgway, right? I kept trying to commit that to memory, and I kept thinking Ridge something else. Ridgway.
No E. No E.
Got it.
Yeah.
1,200 people
Right.
in Ridgway, like, you know, as many people as like a large conference. And your utility is a co-op, which means it's basically member-owned. So does that make things easy? Like, what is, or did you also have to assemble a coalition and have some fights? Tell about how, sort of, what's Ridgway's electricity goal, and how is the utility serving it?
All great questions. So as a distribution co-op, we purchase our power from a generation and transmission company. And so we are part of Tri-State, even though they serve 4 states. Don't understand that. How many here are members of a co-op? Quite a few.
Wow,
Yeah.
lots.
So the process by which the co-op operates is through what they call an all requirements contract with this generation and transmission. And that limits the co-op's ability to self-generate. And currently the contract allows the utility, in this case it's San Miguel Power Association or SMPA, to purchase up to, or to generate up to 5% of their own power. So we do have a small carve out, they call it, for generation, and that's all renewable. So we have currently 3 community solar gardens, we've got 4 micro hydro, and that pretty much brings us up to our 5% cap. So that's somewhat of the limitation of the distribution co-op. The town's town hall happens to be 500 yards away from the utility's headquarters building. So we have a much more intimate relationship with the co-op. I'm in a unique position in that I'm a town councilman for a 3rd term, going on 5 years, but I was also the energy services executive and key accounts executive for the utility. So we have I am somewhat of a conduit between the town and their goals and the utility. Now, having said that, there's about a dozen similar towns, the largest being town of Telluride. Mountain Villages are our biggest towns. Ridgway, we have 1 stoplight, and that's the only stoplight in the whole county. So we have a much different set of challenges. But Ridgway has, over the course of their development of their master plan and their annual strategic plans, have called for promoting as much renewables as possible to offset, the carbon footprint of the town. And we've taken action as a town to do that through cooperation and direct dialogue with the utility. So there's a number of small nonprofit organizations that operate. One is the Uray, it's called ROC, Ridgway Uray County Community Council. They have the Clean Energy Committee, and then there's the Sneffels Energy Board that we presented yesterday about. And the utility actually hosts meetings with these organizations. So they're very involved, and the utility listens closely to the will of the town, the will of the local communities.
Can I just, real quick, a question. How many of these small towns are served by the utility, the co-op?
All the ones I mentioned, a dozen or so total.
Got it.
So we have 15,000 meters, which doesn't sound like much, but we cover 3,600 square miles. So it's a large area, 1,800 miles of line. And it includes hard rock mining in Silverton and Uray, and professional ice climbing in Uray, and Ridgway is arts and theater based kind of a hub. In fact, we have our own International Film Festival coming up in November. Then we move on to Telluride and Mountain Village, which are ski resorts. And then on the west end, we have agricultural towns that raise cattle and sheep. So we have a diverse demographic. The Uray County pretty much leans blue, and some of the other counties, we actually serve 7 different counties. So it's a wide encompassing geographic territory, but not many people. But the town itself has actually worked with the co-op to implement a number of renewable energy programs. So partly based on some of these committees that meet and came up with these ideas, SMPA has developed a green fund, and in that is a program called Totally Green, whereby individual members or residents, as well as the municipalities, can purchase for a penny a kilowatt hour premium access to the renewable energy credits from our generators. So the town of Ridgway signed up for that about 3 years ago. So all of the town's municipal electrical accounts can be claimed as 100% renewable. So that was one major initiative. So the town of Ridgway's all the town buildings, public works, the water treatment, sewer, and so forth, are powered by renewable energy. The town also has worked to put solar in various places, the bathrooms on the parks and things of that nature. Recently, we underwent a master plan process for a park that had been sitting undeveloped for many years, about 10 years. There's a previous master plan for that, and we revised that with the idea of turning that park into a sustainability park. And so the park currently has a community garden and a community apiary, and it's about 6 acres. We went through a lengthy process. We hired a consultant and had a number of public meetings, and the result of the plan is now a sustainability park that includes a variety of sustainability features, like sustainable land use, sustainable water use, but more importantly, it's going to have a 200 kilowatt solar system and then 5 separate solar systems throughout the park for shade structures, for an outdoor education learning center, for a covered bathroom, for a carport with EV chargers. That's something that the town is taking the initiative to develop on their own. SMPA will likely own and operate the 200 kilowatt community garden. The rest of the solar systems would be funded by and operated by and maintained by the town. So, we're kind of punching above our weight, and the ability for us to do that within the confines of the requirements within the utility mean that we have to have this constant dialogue back and forth. So,
yeah, I wanted to ask, so that geographical diversity also includes a diversity of professions, lifestyles, and I'm assuming political, I kind of want to get into the politics a little bit here, presumably a variety of political perspectives. And I'm just curious how, do you run into partisan differences, or has somehow clean power, clean energy routed around that stuff? Are you able to appeal to all those different perspectives with does clean energy have enough benefits that you can sort of sell it to all those different perspectives, or is there meaningful resistance somewhere?
It's a great question, because as I mentioned, we had numerous different demographics. The West End is cattle, mostly farm and agricultural and cattle raising. The majority of the rest of the communities are not. And so with the ski resort, with Ridgway, Silverton, and Uray, there's not much industry. We have very little industry. Our load profile for the entire utility is essentially a residential load profile, meaning we have a morning spike and an evening spike, and then no real large load in the daytime. So within the context of the entire utilities territory, we have differing opinions. Within the town of Ridgway, we have a pretty clear liberal bent.
Why is this town of 1,200 in the middle of nowhere full of liberals? I feel like I'm missing something.
Well, we put a big fence around the town. It's a good question. It was a bedroom community at one point for the workers in Telluride. The pandemic kind of changed that. The Zoom economy allowed folks to move in, of course, from California, Texas, et cetera, which significantly raised the prices of housing, including my taxes, which doubled in the last year. But mostly you're having the influx of new people are the educated professionals that can work remotely. So that kind of defines some of that demographic. And then there's in the town of Ridgway itself, there's theater and arts. And so that's a big draw and restaurant business. So it's a bit of a little bit of a bubble in that sense. So I think that, kind of attracts those leaning people.
Luke, I asked a little bit about politics when you were telling your story, but it's even trickier in some sense, I think, in Utah, because the contrast between a Utah, rancher and a Park City, ski lift operator, pretty far distance. Somehow you've navigated through that politics. I think everybody would like to believe that this is, it's nonpartisan, like Benji says, everybody loves it. But I have trouble believing that. How true is that? Is there still meaningful resistance in your collection of towns, or in your area? Are you fighting through political resistance, or have you basically found that as long as it's kind of opt-in, as long as you're sort of at least doing this voluntary thing and not bugging other people, they're just going to leave you alone to do it? What's the politics?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you think we have a coalition of 19 communities, and they're small ones like our size or even smaller like Springdale outside Zion. I mean, there's a great guy down there named Randy Aton who's helping run this. But then, I mean, we have Ogden and Salt Lake City as well that are engaged, right? And Salt Lake City is I would say it's definitely more left-leaning politics. But then also you have Ogden, right? Working class town. It's gone through some environmental blight, everything from like military dumping to like a couple of, they've had some big issues, but they're also kind of going through this revitalization. So again, do basic math, 19 times, if you have 5 city council members, we're 95 different electeds that are kind of engaged in this too. But again, the thought is politics are a big issue, but you also can't, the great thing is you can't rely on the crush of it either, right? Of again, the state legislature, if folks want to watch, it is wacky. I mean, it is literally 45 days, it's one party, and you'd think they would just get everything done. And it is infighting and all these other things, right? So even if it shows with a quote unquote, it is as one party as you can be, you can lean on towards gerrymandering or whatever you want to say, but you need to work together, right? We need to kind of cut across it and also understand you have to be very flexible in your talking points and the economic piece, rural development, and again, like my role, I deal with the utility a lot and folks are like, that's crazy that you have a community do it, but when you look at our payments going out, it's, the largest things that the economic dollars flow through in our community are the ski resorts. Second largest is our utility. So again, when you start looking at that economic impact and efficiency is an economic driver, right? If I can save our community 10% of their electricity, that's money literally back into our small businesses' pockets. And then when you look at we have a net zero carbon by 2030 goal. If you monetize our carbon footprint, that's now all of a sudden in the $250 million range, right? And my goal is I don't want, especially on the fuel side, I don't want those dollars to go to Venezuela, places that are very bad regimes. And if I can, again, tighten that in through electrification, right? We have over half of our transit fleet is now electric buses. We have 45 free level 2 chargers throughout the community. And when you look at where that's generated within our 6-state territory. And we're, again, trying to continue to tighten kind of our arms around that. And you look at, again, the benefits of that. Now, if there is someone who buys an EV, the fuel that they're getting, it's not coming from the Uinta Basin or something, it's coming from all over the world. Now we can, again, drive those benefits back to that local side. So you have to really, truly rely outside the box. Can I
ask, is there meaningful distributed energy? Like, is there a lot of rooftop solar? Like, are you generating a meaningful amount of energy in Park City?
Yeah, there's a good amount. So there's been a couple.
It's very sunny, right?
I think every single ski town says, "Oh, we have 300 days of sunshine." It's like, well, that and 6,000 inches you're claiming of snow. It is good. So on the city side, we actually have a internal city building code that looks for net zero ready facilities. We've been able to work on everything from solar ready. I mean, the biggest thing too is like a lot of these communities really want to push these things, but then we have very archaic and old building code and all this other stuff that automatically prevents it. So we went through the Soul Smart, where we were the first community in like a red state that actually got Soul Smart Gold. Because again, it's just going back to that kind of freedom, like choose where your energy comes from. And that's the cool thing about electricity, right? I can put solar panels on my roof or I can buy it from the grid. You can't do that for natural gas. You can't do that for your liquid fuels. And then the other argument we make when we're talking to the more conservative side, and I'm talking with ranchers and all these other parts of, it's interesting to talk about the more carbon intensive a fuel, the more cost volatility there is, right? And if you thought of, again, energy as work, and you say, hey, if I can go hire someone for $20 an hour, or I can hire someone that's going to get paid somewhere between $15 and $45 an hour, people look at you like you're high. And again, right, you have to find that relation piece. And the goal on my end is I am dealing with very conservative folks in the state, but you also have to look at the background, and you have to meet them where you are. You have to know what you're going to talk about of energy independence. Going back to the federal piece of the feds regulate emissions. Yes, there's FERC that regulates the transmission interstate side of it, but if you want to get the federal government out of your grid, the quickest way to do it is to reduce emissions. And then for us on our community side, we do community bulk solar buys and that side of it. And the cool thing about bringing together mountain communities is we've been able to learn from each other. So there's a co-op down in New Mexico called Cartin. They've actually been able to meet their goals with 2 megawatt on their distribution system. So you don't even need to step it up a transmission and step it back down. But for us, we're looking at, all right, awesome. How can we then, again, bring these solar back into our community? Because truthfully, it increases your property valuation, so that's always a win for folks who live off property tax. But the other thing too is it does truthfully drive towards that energy independence. It drives towards understanding that kind of energy responsibility side too.
One other semi-political question is, one of the things that's one of the sort of trends that is troubling clean energy people is there's a lot of, solar takes land, so you have to find land, solar and wind really, and there is a pretty concerted effort right now on the right to send people out to these communities where solar is proposed and scare them about cadmium in their water or whatever, sort of scare them off from solar. And so there's a lot of NIMBYism now. There's a lot of, we don't want solar here. You've procured this, you've built this big solar field on a Superfund site. So that's sort of like, lowest level of difficulty in terms of finding land for solar. Beyond that, do you worry about, and I'd love to hear from you about this too, Terry, like, do you worry about community resistance just in terms of like, we don't want solar here, we're scared of solar, or the panels aren't recyclable, or what?
You hear the wind turbines, there's that one picture of the wind turbines in the land.
Yes.
And I'm like, let's go show a coal ash pile, and let's start there, right? Like, and I think it's just, there is, unfortunately, some of the loudest voices have the worst arguments. And yes, it's shocking, I know. Who would have thought in this political atmosphere? But again, there are the NIMBYism piece, but there are, especially for utility scale pieces, there are rural communities in Utah that are, very traditional ranching and that side of it. And the great thing is they actually want these things because, again, you can balance out your property tax that way. You can balance out, you can pay for your school district. So half of our school district funding gets taken from the school district and redistributed through the state to help, again, the school districts, they deserve that money, right? They need that piece. And when you look at, let's compare and contrast a solar farm versus oil and gas, right? And we deal, in Utah, we have something used to be called SITLA, now it's called UTLA. It was, the state got a bunch of chunks of land when the state was created to manage as they want. And they do oil and gas leasing. But when you think, again, the oil and gas markets is extremely volatile, right? It has 400% swings over a decade and that side of it. So you have something coming in that'll have impact, roads, orphan weld, and that side of it. Or you
very boom and bust.
Exactly. Or you have literally something that was a capital investment that is going to pay its property taxes for 25 to 30 years.
It just sits there on the ground, minting money.
Exactly, and people always think, we need to create jobs and stuff like that. I think some of these counties are like, hey, I don't want to turn into another suburb, right? Like they enjoy that rural lifestyle. And again, that's what makes Utah special, is there are parts of the state that, it's extremely dark skies compliant. It's all these other things. And it's just the concept of growing jobs and these other things, it's just going to create more headache. So for these rural communities, we can come in and say, hey, we can get this sited there. And again, you can count on that. It's not creating a huge amount of jobs, but it's not also creating a huge amount of headache. It's just creating a very reliable property tax base for you.
Right, so your current population can be sustainable and you don't necessarily need to grow.
Yeah, when you look at economic development, right, when you talk about bringing businesses in, there's very few businesses that can guarantee that they'll be there for 25 to 30 years.
Yeah. What about you, Terry? Have you run into...
NIMBYism? Well, a lot of the...
Have you heard of this thing called...
Banana was another term that came up, which is ban everything anywhere all the time.
Oh wait, I have to share a term I heard yesterday. I can't remember who I've heard it from, but it's particularly around these sort of ski communities that's not in my second backyard.
That's a good one. Yeah, I like that.
NISBY.
Well, we have through SMPA, my other hat, we have experienced challenges through NIMBYism on two fronts, and then I'll get back to Ridgway here in a moment. But my conclusion from observing this NIMBYism situation depends upon how the project is presented to the community. So a lot of the benefits that you mentioned about the tax revenue going to the schools, et cetera, there was an unsolicited solar developer that came into the West End, which is the more red-leaning area of our territory, and proposed a solar project that was going to be placed between one of the two towns out there and it's called Lone Cone, this one mountain, and it was a view corridor. And it's like, you got to be kidding me. So they started sharpening the pitchforks, and they came out totally against it. They printed signs and banners as you come into town, no solar here, and really went after it. Now, the utility didn't have anything to do with that. In fact, we weren't even approached by the developer. It was just kind of out of the blue. In the Green Street Sustainability Park, where we were looking to site initially about 450 kilowatts, that park is literally next to the HOA, which is called Parkside. So they're next to the park, so they're by the park. So we had a number of members of that localized community that said, we don't want this outside of our windows. We don't want to have to look at the park and see solar panels. But a good percentage of the rest of the community disagreed with that.
I don't get that. What's wrong with solar panels in a
Well,
park?
you're biased. I mean, I have solar on my house. I have batteries in my house. I've had solar on every house I've had for the last 30 years. I think they're beautiful myself. But I've worked in the solar industry since 1978. In fact, that's when I made my first solar cells, and then I went to work at the Solar Energy Research Institute, which is now NREL. So I'm biased as well. But the community, we presented this through this master plan process. We displayed what we believed were the benefits of having the solar in the park, how that's consistent with the town's master plan, how it's consistent with the town's strategic plan, and what the benefits would be. That solar system is going to be tied to a microgrid, which we can talk about in a little bit. And that solar system would literally, tangibly benefit those that would be next to it. So they would be, because it's path of least resistance with electrons, they would be getting the benefit of the clean green energy, even if they're not purchasing it directly. The result was, after 5 or 6 community meetings and a number of different design iterations, the town council compromised on the size of the solar system, went from 425 down to 300, and that passed. So the town council, the mayor who's sitting in the audience here, were heavily behind that because they're familiar and have the institutional knowledge to know that this is something that was important to the town, and we're a bunch of elected officials, and if you don't like what we do, vote us out. So there was a democratic process that we undertook.
And so you actually persuaded some people to change their minds. I just want to verify that that's a possible thing in the universe, that happens.
It was an interesting process. At first we had, the nearby NIMBYs, like no hell, no way, that kind of thing. After this period of time and listening to their other neighbors that aren't necessarily going to see it, they began to see the benefits that it would bring to the town. So once, it's a function of education. Fear is ignorance, and as soon as you can educate, it reduces fear. And as we began to reduce fear, more people began to accept it. In fact, a friend of mine who's building a house right next to the park, he's one of the biggest supporters because he just believes in it. Now, some of the others didn't. Ridgway, it was kind of in a little bit of a bowl, not quite a box canyon like Uray and Telluride. And the town's tagline is "Think outside." So that's the town's tagline. And so people are very sensitive to blocking view corridors. Right. In this case, the solar array would have blocked a view of a cattle pasture that leaches salt. So it wasn't that big a deal, but it was to the people closest to it. So if they're going to put a big 300 kilowatt array literally in your backyard, you may have a different opinion of the guy who's not going to see it.
Yeah, so it's very heartening to hear that it does make a meaningful difference how you approach these communities, and that there is room for persuasion. I guess it's
about benefits.
Shoot, we just have a little time left, and I want to take some questions. But just quickly, one of the big questions, obviously, there's like the economic piece of getting cheaper, clean energy that is helpful for a town. There's the sort of climate piece, like we're doing good things. But then there's also the much more tangible and practical question of resilience. A lot of these isolated mountain towns and communities are subject to increasing extreme weather, mudslides, whatever, mostly fires, especially fires, which we're all very cognizant of this week. And so if power goes out on the big grid, your little town is isolated and kind of screwed. So just quickly, Terry, tell us about this microgrid.
Well, the town itself, the town council supported a grant application through DOLA, Department of Local Area Affairs, has a program called Microgrids for Community Resilience. We initially won 4 planning grants. We've subsequently secured 6 construction grants to a tune of $4.7 million. $2.5 million is going to go to a microgrid to power the entire town of Ridgway, the majority of the town, with a battery that will provide 4 hours of backup power to the entire town.
So wait, I just want to clarify this. Is the battery charged up by solar? This is all clean energy?
That's the ultimate goal. As we can continue to get over the NIMBYism, we have plans to look at another 1 megawatt array along with the 300 kilowatt array. One of the grants we got was to put 120 kilowatts of solar on the roof of the utility building. This will all feed the battery. But another interesting thing that came out of that design process, which makes this truly a community microgrid, is that every resident in town that has a solar system, once the battery, which is called a grid-forming inverter, once it takes over the load during an outage, every solar system in town, after the 5-minute listed required waiting period, will see that the grid is back, won't know that it's not the real grid, that it's a grid powered by the battery. So every solar system, including the one on my house, will feed into the microgrid. So that makes the solar resident, the people that have produced or procured their own solar systems, actual participants in the operation of the microgrid.
Meaningful contributors to resilience.
And that was one of the things that we brought up during the educational period that did sway a lot of people. It's like, oh, this is cool. So my solar system, one, during a normal outage, a typical line-tied solar system can't connect to the grid because the grid is down, which means they can't spin their meter backwards, they can't monetize their solar system. During an outage now, they will be able to still do net metering, as
You're
well
kind
as
of like all in it together. You know?
Yeah,
You're
well,
like,
that's the idea.
Literally supporting one another. So max 4 hours. Is there any talk of, trying to push that out?
Well, the reason we chose 4 hours from the utility perspective is that historically the utility's been able to rectify an outage within 3 hours over the course of time.
I see.
So that was in order to buffer that. Now we've also, as part of that grant, we're looking at, we just got funded to put a microgrid in the town of Rico. That's a $1.5 million grant, and we're looking at the town of Ophir. These are all radial feeders, meaning that the line goes into the town. There's only one line, so if the line shuts down, they're out of power until we repair it. And then the town of Silverton. So we have a separate grant process that we've won $300,000 to do the planning.
So when will this microgrid, when is it supposed to be sort of up and running?
I've been getting emails all through the conference about the contracts, and so once we get the contract signed for the to get access to the grant money, then we have to go out for an RFP, and we expect that process to be done by the first quarter of next year. We expect installation somewhere second quarter. Maybe the installation will be done before the end of this year, so by the end of 2025.
Because I really can't wait to hear the first time the power goes out, you still have power. I feel like that's going to have an effect on people's opinions about these things that is greater than anything you could do to any words that you could use to persuade them. Like having your refrigerator running it's a really good argument.
Another indirect consequence of having that microgrid is that those in town that have backup generators, including the town itself, once the grid is formed by the battery, those generators won't come on. And the generators is one of the highest polluting forms of producing electricity as possible. So there's an indirect benefit of having a battery-powered backup system that all of these things we'll continue to study and
Luke, very quickly on resilience.
Yeah, and really quick, that's just, so we have 10 minutes after that clock runs out to Q&A.
Well, then
I just double checked.
Quit sweating.
No, it's all good. So yeah, the resilience side is huge for our community. Like I said, the wildland fire stuff, so we're in Jackson right now. The AQI when we came into town, I think it was like 400. So we were joking when we first saw each other, like we're just gonna start smoking Marlboro Reds because we can breathe through a filter that way. And it is a very, very real issue. I mean, it's, again, we're part of it's called a public safety power shutoff, PSPS. And if there's a fire within 6 miles, power goes out. And I'm also a wildland firefighter. I've also, it's something that you live and breathe. And that it's kind of crazy to say, but it's interesting, again, to talk to some more of the rural folks. They're seeing these climate impacts directly. Right now we have the Yellow Lake fire. The Forest Service model said this fire should not exist, but it does down in Utah. So as we start looking at that, as we start looking at the resiliency of our community, we're looking at, it's called the Bonanza Park area. It will be very focused on arts and music and kind of that side of it too, because we have that infrastructure. And you literally look at, our communities look at still having that kind of tourism-based economy, but we actually have to, you can either view it as supplement for or prepare for less snow. And then also for, as we look at, we have a substation literally in the middle of town. And as we start looking at if our distribution's coming off that, I mean, the cool thing about bringing these mountain communities together is I'm 100% watching. I want to rip off what Terry's doing, right? Of like, where can we actually supplement this? And this is where, again, we're dealing directly with our utility of undergrounding like key distribution lines of high-risk areas. Because Rocky Mountain Power's parent company, PacifiCorp, has $27 billion worth of settlements against them in Oregon. And that's before the federal dollars come through. So the interesting thing is they've actually pulled way back from their renewable aspirations because they are just trying to pay the settlement bills.
Irony.
Yeah, so for us, we're looking at saying we need to be able to start islanding at least key facilities, key sections of our grid, and then we have a hospital in town on that side of it too, of not just relying on the genset side, because the other thing too is the Wasatch Front, 25 miles away, there's a massive fault line that goes through there too. So if there's a large earthquake, knocks out the natural gas side of it, everyone's thinking, for us, so it's a very real piece, and the resiliency concept is coming up, but it needs to be done at the same time of these climate goals, because again, my goal is to understand where energy comes from, be as efficiently as we can, and then again, we need to buffer against these, kind of much larger issues that are going to run into us.
All right, so apparently we have 10 minutes left for questions, if there are any. I have more, but I'd love to hear from Raleigh. Are you involved in this?
I'll involve
Throw
myself.
the box around or whatever.
All right, who's up first? Okay, everybody put your hands down. Hands down, hands down. Hands down. Go! Right there, right there.
All right, nice catch.
Okay, is this? Yes. For the microgrid in Ridgway, are you doing that with, how is that going to be islanded when there are repairs needed for lines? Is it like separate distribution lines, or is there other ways to island the microgrid on specific lines that need repairs?
It's a great question. So the way the circuit works, there's a single feeder that comes to the town of Ridgway. It actually branches off and goes to other communities, and we place a switch right at that junction point. So when an outage occurs on the main trunk that feeds that line, that switch will immediately open and it will isolate the entire town. And within seconds, that battery bank will pick up the loads in the town. But that's for an outage that's north of that switch. If there's an outage inside the community, that's going to require a series of fault protections, and it may not register an outage at the controls of the microgrid in town, because the three-phase line splits into single-phase lines. I'm sorry to get so wonky, but there's, my house is on one of the single-phase lines. So there's an outage on my line. Of course, I have batteries in my house, so I'm fine. But the other two phases won't be affected. So the microgrid would not kick in if the outage is within the community. But typically the outages are based on the three-phase lines that are subject to avalanches or wind damage, or that takes out the entire feeder. And that's true of the town of Rico and Ophir and Silverton, where they're completely isolated if the outage happens. So it's a great question, and it's part of the engineering.
Like if one phase goes out but not the other two, can you go manually?
Yeah, so
press a button or
that's what
yank something and turn the microgrid on?
That's a great question. We're working on that as part of the design that will inform the RFP to have controls that allow us to do that. Currently, the utility staff, when there's an outage, now we have a very sophisticated outage management. We can ping meters, because we have smart meters, and we can immediately figure out where the outage is, and the linemen go out there and they close switches on either side, they repair the outage and then bring it back up. So that process has to be meshed with the operation of the microgrid. Right. And these are some of the challenges. A community scale microgrid like this has only been done once in the nation that I can find, and it's the arm off of Cape Cod, that end of that spit out there on Cape Cod has a microgrid that isolates the end of that. And there's white papers, and we're busy studying that. But this is pretty bleeding edge stuff. It hasn't been done before.
Cool.
So we have a lot of barriers that we're going to have to overcome.
Very, very cool.
All right, Terry just wins the award for most accurate and correct answer for any audience question. Yeah, why don't you just go right next door?
So you talked a lot about the challenges of new installations and the sort of dealing with NIMBYism. My question is about what you might call like ongoing misinformation about the energy transition and renewables. So full disclosure, I'm on the board of Holy Cross Energy. We're 80% renewables now. We'll be 90% in less than a year.
My hero.
we get stuff all the time like, well, all these renewables are putting our rates up. And we say, well, actually our rates have only gone up 5% in 5 years. And that's because of the new renewables. And like, it's difficult to deal with that. Or another one is, well, these renewables are unreliable. You know, the sort of sun doesn't shine, wind doesn't blow stuff. And we say, actually, no, our reliability is improving. And it's sort of exhausting dealing with it. So I wonder what like your perspective on ongoing misinformation is. Like, do you suffer it and how do you deal with it?
We are all also exhausted.
Yeah, I mean, misinformation happens everything on the electricity grid. In the world of city politics, it happens between tennis and pickleballers. I mean, it's a constant piece. So again, to compare and contrast and add in, I mean, Holy Cross is doing truly amazing work. They're a rural electric co-op that is going to 100% by 2030. That is unbelievably awesome. You have great leadership and awesome board. I'll give you a shameless plug there too. But the misinformation is always there. But to compare and contrast, Rocky Mountain Power is planning a 30% rate increase, and that is not due to renewables. So again, it's easy to say, oh, it's just inflation, costs going up, something like that. But the grid today and the grid a decade from now will be vastly different. And I think the other thing too is understanding that it's also not static, right? Like people always think the load is always constantly through the day and that side of it. So the great thing with renewables, solar for our community or wind or all these other things is they help balance out these peaks and valleys. But the other thing too is some people are just yelling to yell, and that's where, again, the misinformation, that is the world of politics these days. So for us, that's why we try to have these, we have very complex and frustrating relationship with our utility sometime, but I'm not going out to air out that, some of the where we disagree. But it's, again, we just need you have to commit to it and know that misinformation will come out all the time. Like for the other parts of my role, because it's a mountain community, you just don't have one job. I oversee our trails and open space, and there's huge contention around how we should manage that. There's contention on everything, and once you understand, no matter what you do, there will be contention. There were people protesting where our trolley turned around. When you understand what they're complaining about and understand that, all right, we're not dealing with the fentanyl crisis or something along those lines, but again, just walking folks through of showing, and this is what we're trying to do with the community renewable piece of saying, this is the way the grid is planned to operate, but we want to have influence on that too. And again, let's lay out the costs and benefits. And like I said, the issue we're fighting is, the Rocky Mountain Power EBA, their fuel recovery surcharge was $400 million last year. That's without renewables. And again, my response is renewables have a zero cost fuel. So let's drive towards that. And again, just lay that out and just know that there will be misinformation and yelling literally no matter what.
Misinformation or disinformation. I'm not sure where the line is between it. But we did that one project I mentioned where they're anti-solar in their backyard and they put up the signs in town and then in the windows of the restaurants and so forth. I attended the first pitchfork meeting on that, and I was blown away. I thought it was, and not to speak about politics too specifically, but I thought I was at a Trump rally, in that some of the information came out. They, like Ridgway, are a international dark sky community, and some of the information was, that solar system is going to prevent us from keeping our dark sky
It's
certification.
going to glow at night, or what?
Yeah, it's like, and another one was it's going to leach, you mentioned cadmium. That's only one particular type of solar panel, cadtelluride. Silicon is the majority of it. There's no leaching. They said it's going to leak cadmium into the water supply and poison the water supply. It's like, what? Some of these things were made up, and the other one, of course, like the wind, it's going to give you cancer anywhere near it.
Wind turbine cancer.
Yeah. And solar apparently gives you cancer too now. So I was sort of, quietly sneaking to the back of the room and listening to some of this stuff. We didn't, like I said, SMPA did not have a role in that, so I was just there to observe. Fortunately, in the town of Ridgway, where we had NIMBYism, it wasn't for those reasons. We didn't get much disinformation or misinformation. It was more about, I just don't want it in my backyard. I don't want to look out my window and see the solar array. So it varies by site. Is my experience.
This is a hobby horse of mine, so I just want to say a little piece on this, which is the disinformation is not just happening, right? Like there are forces out there hiring people, arming them with disinformation, and sending them to these communities. This is deliberate. It's a deliberate political undertaking to spread disinformation in these communities. And in my experience, people generally on the side of clean energy, I'll just say that vaguely, tend to be somewhat naive about this, tend to think, well, the arguments are on our side, the facts are on our side, and the truth will out. And that does not happen. So I think, everything from the federal government down to tiny town of Ridgway, part of these efforts to do these things, you should be thinking about how to spread good information, actively, not passively, actively spreading good information as part of the project. Like that should not be an afterthought. Like one of the great flaws of the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, when Obamacare passed, there was money in Obamacare for what are called navigators, which are literally just people that go to communities and explain to them, here's what the law did, here's what you have access to now, here's how it works. There's no such money in IRA. There was no thought of like how to tell this story. Like they just thought it would happen. So like I just think like just because your information is good and accurate does not mean your story's not going to tell itself. Like telling the story should be part of all these projects. That's my little rant.
In defense of IRA, real quick, we're also working on a project which is still in early phases that would take IRA money. And because it's a large project and would receive as much as $10 million, that grant requires the development of a community benefit plan. A community benefit plan is this highly structured, red tape, overburdened process whereby you have to engage the community up front prior to the project. You identify the community stakeholders, you hear their concerns, you work with their concerns, you demonstrate not only the intangible benefits of the project, but that you have to fund direct benefits. And one of the examples they gave in the description of this plan development is, for example, purchase a local grain elevator for the local farm co-op, or put in solar benches in the local parks, or something that's a tangible expense that's a direct benefit. Had we, in the process of the master plan, had that process in play, we probably would have prevented a lot of the NIMBYism, because we would have, like the navigator, gotten out in front of some of that misinformation.
Getting out in front is crucial.
So I think that's cool.
I think we're out of time. Yes? All right. We're going to wrap up. Thanks so much, you guys. Very illuminating. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Enjoy.
Big round of applause for Luke Cartin, David Roberts, and Terry Schuyler, everybody.